Good evening. Welcome to Aldersgate United Methodist Church. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Carrie Beckenhauer. I welcome you to this first presentation in our opening series about life and legacy planning. We do have some handouts that are still coming hot off the copier. If you don't have one, we'll get one to you. But you do need to have both handouts. There's one that's up and down, and there's one that's horizontal. So be sure that you get a handout. We want to welcome everybody who's online also. And we hope that, it's a new year. So we have a chance to maybe make a new start. We have a chance to use this maybe as a springboard. We need to tie some things up, or maybe we need to get something started. So I'm going to cover a couple housekeeping points first. One is that, talked about the handouts. One is that the restrooms are out the door you came in. To your left down the hallway, you'll see the water fountain. And when you see the water fountain, you'll be in the right place. Also, please silence any cell phones you might have with you, just out of respect for the speakers tonight. You notice our sanctuary has emergency exits on every wall. Unexpectedly, if we have to exit. And Larry, is Jill here tonight?
Pardon me?
Is Jill here tonight?
Jill's here, but you're not going to be speaking, so go ahead.
Okay, we do have a guest I wanted to introduce. Jill Basinger is here from the East Coast, and she's the daughter of some of the beloved members here at Aldersgate, Karen and Dave Basinger, who both left us too early. And we just wanted to recognize that she escaped the storm to make it here from the East Coast, so thank the Lord for that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have two speakers tonight. Because of that, we're probably going to take a little bit longer than an hour. What we'll do is the speakers will start somewhere when we're at a good breaking point. We'll take a 5-minute break. 5 minutes. Go get coffee, stretch your legs, talk to your neighbor. Come back, the speakers will resume, they'll finish, and then we'll have time for question and answer. I have a wireless mic that we'll be bringing around if you have a question, because people who are online, we want to have them hear what the question is. Okay, well, who are these people? Well, Lori Benson started as a country lawyer, and after a couple of other stops in her law career, then she retired from the Nebraska Bar Association. Andrew Loudon is also with us tonight. He's an attorney at Ball, Loudon, Ebert, and Brostrom. And Andrew's really a good guy, because I've seen him up on the big screen at Husker volleyball games with his family. And there are a lot of Husker volleyball fans in this congregation. So please help me welcome Lori and Andrew.
Lori, I have a few more copies here. If people raise their hands. I have 3 right now. Stacy's got one. We'll get one. Be right back.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started pending those additional copies coming. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start by talking about ways to organize your personal financial business affairs to make it easier for whoever has to administer your estate when the time comes. I would appreciate it if you would hold questions until the end. I have got a ton of things to talk about. And hopefully, as I go along, I'll be answering whatever questions that you might be having. The handout that I have, I'll encourage you to have that in hand, as when I get to a certain point, I'll be referring to that in my presentation. Then we'll take a little break, and then Andrew will provide his perspectives, and as well as add more on what I've said, as well as provide more information about estate administration. So what is estate administration? Well, at its most basic level, It is gathering and protecting the assets of the deceased, paying whatever bills are outstanding, and then distributing whatever's left according to the terms of a will or trust, or if there's nothing, according to state statute. I'm going to be using that term very broadly to include whatever it takes to wrap up the affairs of the deceased. So there are maybe some more precise terms like probate, and Andrew may be using more precise terms. I'm going to be talking very big picture, just whatever it takes to wrap up your affairs when you're gone. The person who does this work is called the personal representative, or PR for short. That's the term in the Nebraska statutes. Other terms that you commonly hear, it's the same thing: executor, an old term I haven't even heard for a while, executrix for a woman. I think that's pretty well gone. But it's all the same thing. And so again, big picture, whoever's job it is to take care of this work. I'll add that the process I'm going to suggest to you is also useful in the event of your incapacity. If you were cognitively unable to take care of your own affairs, pulling together this information would be extremely helpful to whoever needs to step in and take care of your affairs for you. Now, why do the process I'm about to recommend to you? I can think of 4 reasons, and I'll say these are based on my personal experience. First, practicing estate planning and administration law as a country lawyer for a number of years, and then also seeing it from the other side, where I was, as a lawyer, helping the PR or, in that capacity, in a professional capacity. I've also seen it from the other side as a PR myself and or as a beneficiary. So I've seen this process from both sides, and I can tell you how much easier it is if the deceased has done a good job of being organized with their affairs. The 4 reasons to do this. First, you do it for your personal representative and for your beneficiaries. Chances are there are grieving family members involved in this, or friends, and you do not need to make this harder for them by being disorganized and making them go on a treasure hunt and try to figure out what the heck you were doing with stuff and where this account was, that kind of stuff. You do not need to do that. So you do it for them. Second and third, these 2 things are related. You do it to reduce the possibility of errors. It is practically a Murphy's Law that if something gets missed, it will not be discovered until after the estate is closed and everybody thinks they're done and they've moved on. That's when that little old bank account from 20 years ago is going to pop up. And that relates to the third thing, which is holding down the costs of administering your estate. Odds are somebody is getting paid by the hour. It's the lawyer, maybe an accountant if there's one involved, maybe even the PR. And the more they have to chase things and try to figure out things and find old stuff, the more it's going to cost. And your goal was probably to get your assets to your heirs or a charity or something like that, and instead it's being used to pay for estate administration. And that's a needless expense, so don't do that. And finally, this is something I didn't appreciate until I personally did the process that I'm about to suggest to you. And to take a step back, this getting organized was something I'd been meaning to do for a while. And so I had a list of things that I thought, I need to update my estate planning documents. I've got some accounts I'm going to close and some stuff I want to kind of reorganize financially. And I vowed to myself that when I finally got around to doing this, I was going to do every single thing that I had in mind, and I did it. And I found, when I was done, that my personal financial business was more streamlined and efficient, so I'm reaping the benefits of this now, too, by having things better organized. So do it for yourself. I want to distinguish between dealing with your personal property, which is the stuff that we own. We're not talking about that tonight. I think it's important to do personally, and I encourage you to do that. And there are tons of resources for that. Included in my handout, I have the book titles and authors of a couple of books that I read back 5 years ago when I was doing this, that at the time were available at Lincoln City Libraries. And I think actually your speaker next month in this series is the woman who wrote, I won't maybe get the title quite right, Keep the Memories, Not the Stuff, Janine Bryant. And so I assume she'll have a lot to say about dealing with your personal property next month. But I encourage you to do that. We're also not talking a lot about if you have an interest in a business, if you own a business, if you've got property beyond your primary residence, so if you've got rental property or vacation home, that kind of thing, we're not talking about that. I would encourage you to do a process similar, especially if you own a business or if you've got rental property or whatever, so that somebody's got that information readily available. But our focus this evening is on your financial and personal business details, instructions, things like bank accounts, investment accounts, where are the important documents located, who are the key contacts, where do you get your snail mail, that kind of stuff. There are resources available, because I've been planning to do this for a while, I had my antenna up, and I did come across resources that could be helpful in pulling together this kind of information. And so I found things from like insurance companies or investment firms and so forth. And so that stuff is out there. I found like some little booklets that you could fill in information like, your bank account numbers, that kind of thing. I found some checklists. I found that you could buy systems, whatever that means, that would help you organize your stuff. So I'm not sure what you get, if you get a nice box or a file folder, I don't know what you get, but there are systems with presumably instructions on how to do this. And you can buy software or programs that have like fillable PDFs and so forth. So there are things out there if you'd like. But I'm going to tell you about what I ended up doing and what my personal lessons learned as I went along. The first thing I want to do is show you, and I know this won't show up well online or maybe even in the back, but you'll get the idea. I actually have an estate administration notebook. And I wanted one with a pocket because I wanted a place for an envelope that has my safe deposit box key. It's got a flash drive that has the contents of about a dozen pages of notes that I pulled together from my PR. And I also wanted a place where I could stick in a little note if something occurs to me that it's like, oh, next time I do an update, I want to be sure to mention this, or this has changed, and I don't want to forget about it. So I've got a little place I could just tuck in a little note if I need to. Then I've got about a dozen pages of notes, and I'll go into more detail on what's included here. For some reason, I have a whole box of these sheet protector things, and so I use these, and I wanted to do that because I've got some things I did not want to 3-hole punch. But I have to tell you, I started out putting my safe deposit box key in there and my flash drive, and they kept sliding out because they're so slick. So I have, as I said, about a dozen pages, and then I've got other things like a copy of my will and a copy of the business card for the law firm that I'm recommending to my PR. I've got my other estate planning documents, my durable power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, all those things that are important to have. And then I have a variety of other things, like, did you know that Medicare, you can go online and you can designate somebody that you're saying to Medicare, if this person contacts you to talk about my account, you can talk to them. And you can do that online, and then you can print that page. So I printed it, I've got it in my notebook. I've got a variety of things related to my retirement and investment accounts. I've got things like a birth certificate, and it's really old and yellow, marriage license. I have my usernames and passwords, which I maintain on an Excel spreadsheet. And I'll talk more about that as well. But that's what's in my notebook. Now, here's the mindset that I would suggest that you start with to do this work. What would it take for somebody else to step into my shoes? And that's going to be the basic stuff, account numbers, that kind of stuff. But it's also going to be some insider information, the kind of thing you might tell somebody over a cup of coffee or whatever. And it's going to be things also that the PR and your beneficiaries do not need to look for, which can be extremely helpful. Again, time and money, right? So let's tell them what they don't need to worry about. So that's the mindset. So when I started in on this work, I finally started in January of 2019, and I found this online free fillable PDF that was the kind of information that I wanted to gather. So I started in filling that out, and I'd do a page and print it and put it in my notebook. Well, then I'd been thinking about, and I'd been looking to sell my house and move into an apartment, planning to lead a carefree retiree life, which going into COVID did not turn out the way I planned. But anyway, so I got sidetracked starting in February, after starting in January in this, got sidetracked in February, trying to move out of my house that I'd lived in for 30 years. And meanwhile, I was still working, had a busy career, business travel, you know. And so I did not get back to this until summer of 2020. So a year and a half later, I found, I pulled out the work that I'd done a year and a half earlier, and I was surprised that even leaving aside moving, the number of things that had changed. And I would not, if you'd asked me, I would have said, oh no, nothing's changed. Well, this little account I didn't have anymore, and this credit card, I got a different one, it had a different number on it, and you know, there's just a variety of things that, you know, I had a different financial advisor. I mean, things had changed. And it made me think, made me realize that I needed to create something that was easy and convenient to update. And I update on an annual basis, pretty much. And so I needed something that was easy to update. And between that and this PDF that I found really wasn't working that well for me, it had tons of things, information that I just didn't apply to my life. So there were all these pages. And then there also was not enough room to include some of that insider information that I wanted to share with my PR. So I decided I was just going to check the whole thing and start over, and I did. And I decided that I was going to use a Word doc instead, a Word document. And I knew that it would be neat and readable and easy to update, and so that's what I did. Now, I have some concerns about that from a security standpoint, and I'll talk about that later. But I have to tell you, it was darn handy for creating the document with the notes that I wanted. So I'm going to switch now, and I want to go into a little bit more detail, so get out your handout, and I want to talk a little bit about the actual contents of the notes that I wrote for my PR. The first thing I want to note is I've got the last update date. So include the date you created it, the last date you updated it. And as you can imagine, it is very helpful to your PR to know how much he or she can rely on what you're saying based on how old it is. If there's no date, or it's really old, if it's 5 years old or whatever, that makes it harder for the PR to think, yeah, this is pretty trustworthy information. So put a date on it. And then it's the kind of information you would expect, you know, under personal information, name, address, phone, social security number, that kind of thing. I want to drop down to under other contacts. There I've made a note of where I keep addresses, and that could come in handy. I've made a note about the fact that there are usernames and passwords included here. And most of us have online lives now. It's pretty hard to avoid. So it could be very helpful to your PR, especially immediately when they're trying to do an assessment of what is there that I need to take care of and how much and where is it, that kind of thing. And it could be really helpful to them to be able to access things like your bank account or your retirement accounts or whatever. And it's not that they won't get access to those accounts eventually, but sometimes it can take a while. It can take some work. And so that and being able to get in could be really helpful. So nobody cares about our Panera Rewards accounts, right? What we're talking about here are the valuable things, right? The bank accounts, the IRA, that kind of thing. Related to that, as we have increasing security for these types of online accounts, it can be really helpful to your PR to be able to access your smartphone with multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, whatever that might be. So I know my list includes how to access my phone, my iPad, my laptop, and include details about where you keep those things and so forth. That can be really helpful to your PR as well. And again, security concerns about that I'll talk about a little bit later on. Okay, where you live. I've got here my landlord, and one of the things I asked him was, what would it take for my PR or family member to access my apartment if need be? And I made a note of what his response was. Now, this is a great place to include that insider information that could be really helpful. For example, does one of your neighbors have a spare key? Do you have one of those fake rocks in the backyard with a spare key in it? That kind of information that you can share could be really helpful to your PR. And, I'll say this is true of a lot of this information. It's not that people wouldn't eventually figure this out. They probably would. It's a question of, could you be helpful in terms of getting it to them sooner, not making them dig for it, not having it be too late, that kind of thing. So this is a place, as I said, where you could include some extra information. I've included things like, where do I get my snail mail? And because I have an assigned parking spot in an underground parking garage at my complex, I've included the number of my parking spot. So that's primary residence. Online, again, most of us have an online life of some kind, or maybe this is an example of something that your PR does not need to take care of. So some people do store important documents online, and even more commonly, I think, store photos online. I have made a note for my PR that I don't do that, so they don't need to go looking for any of those things. I am staying out of giving any legal advice. I'm leaving that to Andrew tonight, but I will say this. In the last, I don't even know how long, 10, 15 years maybe, there's been federal legislation and even state legislation on this in Nebraska, making it easier for PRs and family members to have access to online accounts. And part of the problem was social media accounts that were kind of being stinkers about dealing with a deceased person's accounts. And so one of the things you could do is put this in your will. It doesn't hurt anything. And that's something you should be talking to your estate planning lawyer about. But I've also included here that I've given I'm telling my PR that permission is in my will, which they will probably already have seen by now by the time they see this. And that furthermore, I don't have anything that needs to be saved or memorialized. I'm not a big social media person. I don't care what they do with those accounts. But if I did care, this would be a place to put it. Moving on, bank safe deposit box information, the kind of thing you would expect. And including maybe some insider stuff. Like I've made a note that my Vanguard account is directly linked to my checking account. I don't know if that'd be useful or not, but I've made a note of it. Two things that I ask my bank, and I ask Vanguard and Fidelity, which is, first, do you have a trusted contact option? And what that is an opportunity for you to say to your bank, your brokerage firm, if you see something that you think is fishy and you can't get me, or you don't think you're getting a very good answer from me, here's who you can contact. And so here's how it plays out. Vanguard sees something that they think, oh, no, that can't be right, and they can't get me, or I give them a nonsense answer, and then they can call my daughter and say, you know, your mother just put in an online request to liquidate everything and send it to a Nigerian prince. That doesn't seem right. And that's a safeguard, both for scams and identity theft, as well as a recognition of the fact that we have an increasingly elderly population that maybe doesn't have family around, isn't maybe seeing the cognitive slippage, and so it's a way to protect us. And I will say this is not just a senior citizen thing. This could happen to anybody. I don't see a downside to using a trusted contact if they offer that, and so I'll encourage you to do that. Not everybody does. I use a little local bank. They don't do this. So, you know, that's a downside maybe of a little local bank. But the other question I ask my bank and Fidelity and Vanguard is, what would it take for my PR to access my accounts? So I got answers from them. I put them in my notes. This is 5 years ago now, so I don't remember exactly what was what here. I do remember some of the stuff I could do online. One of them, they sent me a form, I filled it out, I mailed it or faxed it or something. So anyway, they all have their different procedures, they gave me different answers. So it's worth asking individually. And again, it's not that they wouldn't get in eventually, but let's make it easy, right? And let's set it up for as much success as we can. And I also think this is I've got a tickler to ask every few years, just in case something's changed. Now, do they need a form where they didn't before? And, you know, is there a different process? So I think it's worth asking. Let's see. So I've made a note of bills that are auto-paid out of my checking account periodically, and things that are charged to a credit card periodically, whether we're talking monthly or annually, whatever. And I've made a note of any bills that I especially think I want to call attention to, my PR's attention to. And a great one is whatever property you have that you want to be sure you got property insurance for, give your PR a heads up on those insurance premiums and when they're payable. Because here's a scenario you do not want to have happening within a short period of time. You die, your homeowner's insurance premium was due and didn't get paid because there wasn't anybody to pay it, and your house burns down. And yes, this has happened. Andrew can tell you about the case law. Look at him nodding his head. Yes, it has happened. You do not need to, this is a unforced error. You don't need to do this. So make note for your insurance premiums, especially property insurance, when they're due. And that could be a nice heads up, again, as your PR is trying to get the lay of the land and figure out what needs to be done first. I've got a note about debit and credit cards and where they're located, how I use them. This would be something you maybe want to take photocopies of, front and back, put them in your notebook. I've got notes about my legal and financial documents, primarily my estate planning documents, where they're located, that kind of thing. I'll say that as part of my big effort to do all the things that I intended to do, I generated a lot of documents, and I was putting little sticky notes on them that said, you know, this number of copies, I need this number of originals, and this number of copies, and they're going to go here, and they're going to go there. And I thought, oh, man, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to go make copies, and I'm going to miss something. So I created a matrix that has a box that has the documents, along the top, and where they all go along the bottom, and where those boxes meet. It's how many copies, how many originals, that kind of thing. And it was super helpful when I went to make copies and then to see that they all got the right places, because they go different places, right? And so that was really helpful to me at the time. And then, so the first couple years after I did this, I'd think, let's see, did I give my healthcare power of attorney to my primary care doc? Well, I could go look at my little box, and it's like, yes, I did do that. As a matter of fact, it's in the matrix here. And so it was super helpful for that too. So it's a real belt and suspenders approach. It tells you everything you need to know about my personality, I guess. But other information. When my PR or the attorney or the accountant looks at my expenses for the last couple of years, they're going to note that I have written 1 or 2 checks a year to a financial advisor. And so they could reasonably think, oh, there could be some assets being managed by this financial advisor. We better dig into this. Well, I'm including the contact information, but here's the insider information. My financial advisor and I just consult periodically. He doesn't manage anything for me. And so there really isn't anything that he needs to do related to my estate. So I provided the information, and I provided the clarification on why they don't need to go look for it. Same thing with your tax returns. Who prepares your tax returns, and where are those last few years of returns located? So include that information as well. Your PR is free to hire any lawyer or accountant, whoever it is they need to hire. But I do think that especially family members appreciate having your suggestion, and especially if they don't live here, if they're not local, they'll appreciate having that suggestion. So include that information. So my designated PR is my 36-year-old daughter who's a busy family doc in Denver, and we'll talk about any of this for about 30 seconds before she starts getting distressed and she's done, which, is kind of flattering. And my contingent PR, the backup PR, is a brother who lives in Montana who has a ton of he's a lawyer with expertise in Western states water law, and estate administration is not in his wheelhouse at all. And he's not any more excited about doing this either. So what I did was talk to a local trust company, and this is the kind of work that they do. And so I, did some legwork and said, okay, well, this would be an option for my daughter or my brother, that they can, if they don't want to do this, it really doesn't work for them, whatever it might be, they can, I'll encourage them to try this trust company. They're willing to be the PR. They're willing to be hired by the PR and do whatever needs to be done. They do good work. This is what they do. This is their expertise. And I thought their fees were pretty modest. So I've given them a suggestion of how they can deal with this otherwise. And I know Andrew's got some other thoughts on who should be a PR. But that's what I've got, and that's what I've done to try to make this work. Life insurance. So this is something I want to mention as a really great example of something that I'm telling them they don't have to look for. My PR does not have to look for. So I mentioned the tax returns. The PR, the lawyer, the accountant, somebody is going to want to see the last few years of my tax returns. And when they do, they're going to see a little bit of interest income from a life insurance company, which reasonably could lead them to think, oh, there's an asset here, there's a policy, we better go find it. Well, that was one of those things I'd intended to do. When I was born, my folks took out a little whole life policy that, I don't know, it's probably designed to cover burial expenses, I suppose, which was a nice little policy at the time, but fast forward 65 years, it was just very small little policy. And so I had been meaning to cash it in, so that's one of those things I did. It was kind of some horsing around, but I got it done. And so now I have put a note in here that says, yeah, I had this life insurance policy, I cashed it in on this date, it's gone, you don't have to go look for it. Now, they would figure this out eventually, but how many hours on the phone with life insurance companies is it going to take to figure this out? Needless waste of time and frustration. So that's the kind of thing you could include. Now, I'll say that with the updates, in fact, I'm pretty close to this point already now. It's old enough that I could probably just drop this out in one of my updates. But I'm going to leave it, I'm a belt and suspenders person, so I'm probably going to leave it till we get at least 6 years past, because usually IRS doesn't go back farther than that. Okay, other insurance, I've got the details for that, health insurance, auto, renters, umbrella. Other assets, I've already talked a little bit about Vanguard and Fidelity accounts and you know, any kind of assets like that, whatever it is you've got, you know, include the details there. Who are the beneficiaries, that kind of thing. I've got details about my car, where's the title of my car, where do I keep the keys, where's it parked. And then I've got a little list of personal property. Now this is something that Nebraska uses a personal property statement, right? Yeah. Nebraska, I practiced in Iowa, by the way. So, you know, I did have a Nebraska license until just very recently, but I never practiced in Nebraska. But a personal property statement is a place you can list this, and it's really handy, especially if you want personal property to go different places. Well, mine's all going to my daughter. So what I've chosen to do is just list a few things in here because it's easy to update. And I just want to give them a heads up that this is something that might have some value. Maybe you wouldn't recognize it. So I'm telling you it's got some value. And so if they don't do anything with it, that's fine. But, you know, I've done my part. Now, that's what I have in my notebook. I made a list of everything I could think of that somebody else might need that I didn't happen to. So just running through the list, and this is on the handout, service providers, yard, housekeeping, garbage, whatever it might be. So you can settle up and let them know they don't need to come, you know, in 2 weeks or whatever. Debts, promissory notes, whether you owe money to somebody or they owe money to you, include the details, where are the original documents, and maybe put some copies in your notebook. We've talked a little bit about businesses and real estate already, your non-primary residence real estate, military service and discharge records. If you've had some appraisals done on anything, especially in the last few years, that could be handy. Off-site storage details, especially if you're not paying for the storage. You know, include what it is and where it is. My late husband and I owned a little sailboat that my husband had a friend that had a warehouse, and our little sailboat was parked in the corner of his warehouse. I don't think any money ever changed hands. I think it was probably a couple cases of beer a year. If something had happened to the two of us, you know, that sailboat probably would have surfaced eventually, but you know, who knows when. It would have been after our estates were closed, guaranteed. So that's the kind of thing. If you've got something someplace else, make a note of it. Documents related to prenuptial agreements, divorce, separation, child support, custody. It doesn't matter how long it's been. Lots of those documents have something that kicks in when somebody dies. And so the lawyer's going to want to see those, so just put them in your notebook. Things that you can include them, but you need to deal with these in advance because this information, like a will, may not be seen till after a funeral. And so you don't want to include your funeral arrangements in here, or if you do, you also want to be talking to whomever is going to be making the arrangements. Let them know what your plans are. Your health details, you want to be talking to your healthcare power of attorney, and if you need to share some health information, you know, again, you need to do that. arrangements for your pets, unless you've got an anaconda that you only feed every 3 months or whatever. You need to have arrangements made for what happens to your pets. Calendar time, I've got a calendar tickler for once a year to do an update. If something significant happens in your life in less time than that, maybe you ought to plan to do another update. So you move, your spouse dies, whatever it is, maybe you want to do an update sooner. These next two things, super important. Listen carefully, think carefully about this. Security. This information, these are the keys to the kingdom, right? It really kind of made me uneasy to even put all this stuff in one place. It was like, it's safer if it's diffused, but it's like, no, we pull it all together. But let's figure out how to be careful about this. So that's the downside of working on a Word doc with your internet-connected laptop. And so what I have chosen to do, both for the contents of this and for my Excel spreadsheet with usernames and passwords, I disconnect from the internet, I go offline, and I work on a flash drive. I do not store any of this on the hard drive of my internet-connected laptop. And yet this still makes me kind of queasy. So if anybody's got good advice or ideas on how to deal with this, I'd be very interested in talking to you. A couple suggestions that I have. I know I'm going to be ordering a new laptop for myself here pretty quickly, and maybe I'll just hang on to that old laptop. It'll probably never be plugged into the internet again, and I can just work on that as long as the darn thing will still boot up and run. And so that's one possibility. And a laptop, that doesn't take much space to store. Another possibility, as I was talking to friends about this, in 2020, as I was doing this, chatting with friends, I had several people say, oh yeah, my uncle did something like this. And one good friend said, oh yeah, my mom had the blue notebook. And it was so helpful to her. And that blue notebook was handwritten. So that's another possibility. Just handwrite it, get out your old typewriter, figure out, keep in mind, I would not suggest a spiral-bound notebook where you just, one page after another, because again, think about that update. So, you want a 3-ring binder, you want a file folder, something, one topic per page, so you can take it out, redo the page, and put in a fresh page, because you do not want something that's a bunch of crossed out stuff and stuff in the margins and all that. That's when you got a problem in terms of people maybe being able to figure out what's up. So those are options that, provide a little more security. Then think about where you store this. It obviously does not belong on the coffee table in your living room or any of the other public areas of your home. You want it accessible, but kind of tucked away, so think about that. And then think about with whom you share this information and how. So again, as I was talking to friends, one friend was very excited. She said, oh, I'm going to do this and send it to my kids. Well, she was 60-ish at the time in good health, and her kids were in their early 30s, and I thought, I don't know. And that's about the age my daughter was at the time. And so I thought, no, I'd rather keep this information close. And so what I've done is I've talked to both my daughter and my brother. They're aware I've done this, where I keep this information. I remind them periodically that I've done this, and I'm good with that for now. I also, you have to think about, because I want to keep it close because it's such sensitive information, but I don't want to burden them with having to store something that's so important to me. And you got to think about that update too. So are you going to make a bunch of new photocopies and FedEx stuff every year, and then count on them to destroy the last year's version? It's like, no, I don't want to do that. So I'm happy keeping this close. If I got some horrible health diagnosis tomorrow, would I make a different decision? Yeah, I'd probably be sharing this information and seeing if they'd like to talk about it. So think about how you create it, how you store it, with whom you share it. Last two things, make it your own. Create it so that it serves your purposes and conveys what you need to convey to your PR. And finally, just do this. I realize this sounds pretty daunting. And honestly, especially since I was determined to do every single thing I'd been meaning to do for the prior 10 years, it took some time to get this done. I worked on this over the summer and the fall because it took time to back and forth with the insurance company and that kind of stuff and just pull this all together. But I was so glad to get it done. And now because I'd done as careful a job as I could the first time, the update is not too bad. I can do that pretty quickly. And again, it is surprising the number of things that change. So you do need that update, but it's not bad to do. So I'll just say, just start in and just get it done. Anything you get done is going to be better than nothing. Even if all you do is pull together your bank and investment account information, that's still going to be useful. So do what you can. This month's Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine, the February issue, is promoting the idea of, as the perfect Valentine's gift, get your estate planning done. And I would include, do this too. Now, if you skip the flowers and the candy, that's on you. I do not recommend that. But it is a wonderful thing to do for the people you love. Just get this done. So, thank you. And now the break.
Thank you, Lori. And now we're going to take our 5-minute break, and then Andrew will come up when we come back. Thank you. Stretch your legs, bottled water, hot coffee, cookies.
Lori and I are at it. You can be in the middle. No, I'll do a selfie.
It's a great program because we're beginning to talk about it. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, hey, we are.
No, that's
Okay, I think we're ready to start. I hope you all stretched your legs, got something to drink, got a cookie, picked up some fruit, talked with your neighbors. I think we're ready to go. So now we're going to have part 2 with Andrew Loudon.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm pleased to be back. I have a lot of personal connections to this congregation. I know many of you, but I haven't known anybody in the room longer than Tony and Kitty Anton, because their son Burr and I were in Boy Scouts together, and they were some of my Boy Scout leaders in 1987, the year that we moved to Nebraska. My dad, see, you've invited a Presbyterian. My dad's and my brother are Presbyterian pastors. We say debts instead of trespasses. And when we moved here, when I was in 9th grade, from Newcastle, Pennsylvania, I'd never been west of Cleveland, and I thought my life was over. I was also a Life Scout and picked the closest Boy Scout troop that I could walk to, since I didn't have my license yet, and that was at what was then known as Calvary East Lutheran, which is now Messiah, and these two folks were my Boy Scout leaders, so I'm really thrilled to see you, and their son Burr and I were good friends. And then when we moved to town, right across the street was Barb Nielsen, and wow, I walked in and here she is for her mom's reception tonight, and her funeral's here tomorrow. Barb was my drum major in the Lincoln East Band, Barb Schmidt now, and then my drum major in the Cornhusker Marching Band. And then everyone knows Larry Ruth, but Larry's been a mentor of mine for the last 25 years. So I have a lot of connections to you. I also remember speaking here 20 years ago as a lieutenant with my boss and mentor, Doug Deichler, who at that time was the chancellor of the annual conference, the attorney for the United Methodist Church. Well, I love giving this presentation with Lori, and this is about the 3rd or 4th time, maybe more, that we've done it. You can see us at Ollie. That's a plug. We love Ollie, and we're volunteer presenters at Ollie. And this was Lori's idea, and I love it. Now, some of you have heard me give my spiel before, and I brought along my handout. I'm not going to be speaking about this, sorry, today. This is my typical talk, which is focused on when people are alive, estate planning. That's what everybody wants to talk about, estate planning. And if you have questions about any of the things on my handout about estate planning, I'll stick around afterwards. But Lori's great idea for our presentation is to focus on when the rubber hits the road after people die. And that's now, having been an attorney for 27 years in this space, that's now more than half of what I do during my day job, is help families after someone has died. And that's when we see if the estate plan actually worked. And so, first of all, please do what Lori has suggested and modeled for you here. It is a gift to your loved ones. Every day almost in my professional life, I meet with families who have lost somebody recently, and most families are in shock. They're all grieving, and they're disorganized, because even the most disorganized person, if their parent or their uncle or an aunt had not left them a roadmap like Lori's left her daughter, it's very stressful because decisions have to be made quickly. My friend Tom Roper has told me that there's 64 decisions that have to be made about a funeral. And so pre-planning is also a gift, because your family does not have to guess what songs you want sung at your funeral. Let me walk you through what I talk to families about when I meet with them after they've lost a loved one. And my goal here is an educational one, and I hope that it helps you think through these things as well. When I meet with a family after they've lost a loved one, I start out by saying there are 2 big issues that we're going to deal with. They are separate, but they're interrelated. They are, number 1, the mechanics of transferring wealth pursuant to the estate plan now that your loved one has passed away. And number 2, the tax consequences to that transfer. And I'll use 2 examples for both the mechanics and the taxes this evening that I hope will be helpful. And they're the 2 most common examples of assets: a personal residence, your home, and a 401k or a traditional IRA. Now, we meet with clients all the time who have farms and businesses and other assets, but let's just focus on those two most common assets and talk about the mechanics and the taxation, and then talk about the other issues that we discussed at that first meeting. And then Lori and I will answer any questions that you have. So first we talk about how do we transfer the house pursuant to the estate plan. Well, there's many different ways to skin the cat. For a married couple who own the house as joint tenants with rights of survivorship, when the first spouse dies, it could be as simple as filing the death certificate with the Register of Deeds office for a $5 filing fee to remove the name of the first spouse to die. That may be all that's required. At the second death of a married couple, in Nebraska, if the real estate is worth more than $100,000. By the way, folks, that's every single personal residence in Lincoln, Nebraska. I have a statewide practice. I have a new estate in Richardson County, beautiful brick home in Falls City that's worth $80,000. So across rural Nebraska, we still have nice homes worth less than $100,000, but not anywhere within a 2-mile radius of this congregation. And so anybody whose home is worth more than $100,000 has to go through probate. That's a surprise to many families that I meet with. Increasingly, I'm meeting with my friends who went to East High, like Barb, because their parents have passed away. And, you know, I'm the kid who stayed. I'm the one who coordinates the reunions. All my friends from East High, class of '91, best high school in America, they've moved away and done really great things. But then their parent dies and they come back and they meet with me and they say things like, you know, no offense, Andrew, but I don't feel great about having to pay you, even though we're buddies, just to probate my mom's estate because she died. Why? You know, the will's clear. It says that the house goes to my sister and me. Why can't we just go take care of it? Well, the answer is, and it's a little arcane, in Nebraska, as in most states, if your own real estate in your own name alone, so this would be for a married couple at the second death that's worth more than $100,000, you have to go through probate unless you had a trust or a transfer on death deed. Most people don't. The majority of Americans don't do any estate planning at all. That's not surprising to me when I meet with my friend whose parents never got around to doing it. Most people who do estate planning only do a will. And many people are under the mistaken impression that they avoid probate by doing a will. The opposite is true with a house worth more than $100,000. That's the most common trigger of a probate. And so to avoid probate, if that's a goal, which for most people it is, because they want to significantly reduce attorney's fees, they want to make things quick and easy at death, and they want some modicum of privacy, most of our clients will use a revocable living trust, which is a document that's created during lifetime. Now, the trick with avoiding probate there is to make sure that the house is in the trust, meaning that a deed has been filed that deeds the house to the trustee of the trust. About 10% of the time when I meet with this friend from East High whose parent did a trust in the past, they forgot they had a trust, they downsized, sometimes they upsize after the kids leave, and they bought a new piece of real estate, or they moved to one of our assisted living facilities in Lincoln, over half of which now require you to buy, not rent. And so it's just like you owned a house if you live at Eastmont or the Legacies or the Grand Lodge or the or any one of our facilities where you have to buy into that. And if you just put that $250,000 deposit in your own name, guess what? There's a probate. So there's a lot of pitfalls, and real estate is a big one. And so when I'm meeting with the family, we talk about what's required. If there's a probate, it's not the end of the world. It is annoying. We have to have the original will, admit it to court, have the personal representative, what we call an executor in Nebraska, appointed, and start this dog and pony show of advertising in the newspaper and for creditors and the like. So sometimes the mechanics with transferring a real estate seem like they're annoying, and I can understand that. What about taxes as it relates to a house? Well, here's where I can give some good news to that friend of mine from East. I said, well, it's annoying that you have to pay me to transfer the house, but here's the good news. You and your sister are going to receive what's called a step-up in basis, which will eliminate the capital gains income taxes. Since you didn't live at your parents' residence for the last 20 years, it's not your residence, but because you've received it from them due to death, you get what's called a step-up in basis, which means that their basis was whatever they paid for the house 20 or 30 years ago, but because of their death, you have an unlimited adjustment of that, and so if the house is sold for the value that we place on that property, which we always want to value it at the sale price or less, then we've eliminated any capital gains income taxes. So with a property like the personal residence, there should be no income taxes. Then when they're feeling good, I remind them that Nebraska is one of 5 states that still has an inheritance tax. And so let's talk about death taxes. In addition to income taxes, every estate is potentially subject to 2 potential death taxes or inheritance taxes, one at the federal level, one at the state level. The federal estate tax does not impact many people anymore, although it gets the most press from politicians and in campaigns. But the current exemption from the federal estate and gift tax is $13.9 million. That's brand new, hot off the presses this month. By the way, your exemption per year for gift taxes went up to $19,000 this year. You can give as many people as you want $19,000 without any reporting requirements with the IRS. But it's not until your estate exceeds $13.9 million that you're subject to the federal estate tax. And I see a lot of you smiling. And yes, most of our clients are worth below that. Even though I'm a city kid, I do have the privilege of working with hundreds of ag producers across the state, and the average Nebraska farm is worth a lot. And so we have a lot of farmers and ranchers who are concerned, rightfully so, with the value of land about the federal estate tax. But for most of us, myself certainly included, with a father who's a pastor and a mother who's a teacher, not going to be inheriting a farm, we're not worried about exceeding that. So that's usually the end of the story for most of our clients. However, as Larry Ruth, who, if you don't know, Larry's very modest. He's one of the most prominent lobbyists down at the unicameral until he retired. He's still prominent because he volunteers and helps with all the uniform laws, and he'll be down there tomorrow. They open tomorrow. I know he'll be down in the rotunda saying hi to his friends. So as Larry could tell you, Nebraska is one of 5 states, soon to be only 4, that has our own inheritance tax. You know, when I graduated from law school in 1998, every state had its own transfer tax, and Nebraska is one of only that has 4 left. And the political reason is because, well, you know, we're unique. We do things differently here. We have the only one-house legislature. We divide our electoral votes differently. Only one other state, Maine, does that. And we're the only state in the union that collects our inheritance tax at the county level. The other 49 states, when they had it, collected it as state revenue. But it's never been that way in Nebraska. Since 1901, when the tax was created, it's collected by our 93 counties. And that's the political reason that it's not gone away, despite the efforts of this governor in the last 3, because the counties have stopped them in their tracks, because they like that revenue. So it's all about lobbying and politics. So we, unfortunately, to most people, still have the county inheritance tax. How does it work? Well, that's also unique. No other state does it this way. We tax people based on how they're related to the person who died, which I will tell you, I think is very regressive as it relates to remote and non-relatives, and I'll explain. There's 4 categories. The first category is those who pay 0% Nebraska inheritance tax. Those are your spouse. So spouses pay no tax. So when that house or that retirement account goes to the spouse, that spouse pays 0 Nebraska inheritance tax. The other entity that does not pay inheritance tax is a qualified charitable organization. So when you die and you leave part of your estate to the Aldersgate United Methodist Church, how'd I do? All right, there we go. And I'm not shy about saying, as a preacher's kid, a PK, and a preacher's brother, I'm going to get on my soapbox for 2 seconds. It's only churches who do effective plan giving today that will be able to afford a pastor and a building tomorrow. And that tomorrow is coming fast. It's predicted that in the next 10 years, 40% of Protestant churches will close. My brother's pastor of a small church in central Ohio, and he's living this. He's 5 years younger than me. I'm 52, he's 47. He's worried about whether he and his friends who are pastors will have a job in 20 years when he's about to retire. So I do encourage you. That's not why you asked me here, but sorry, I got the pulpit. I encourage you to leave a planned gift to your local church. Gifts, small and large, matter and will sustain this congregation that you love. All right, back off the soapbox. I don't do that at all, sorry. But the Nebraska inheritance tax does not tax charities, does not tax spouses. What are the people who pay taxes? Well, category number 1, close relatives, children, grandchildren, parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, people married to those individuals. Each receive a $100,000 exemption, meaning no tax, and then pay 1% of every dollar over and above that, the tax being due to the county within 12 months of the date of death. That's not that big of a deal. Now, 1% of a York County farm is a big number, but 1% of most of our estates, it's a nuisance, is what I would describe it as. Where this tax is regressive, in my opinion, is the fact that, I don't know how else to say it, we punish people who do not have children in Nebraska, unfortunately. So for category number 3, nieces, nephews, cousins of the first and second degree, uncles and aunts, or people married to them. And I have a lot of clients who do not have children, and they tend to leave their estate to their nieces and nephews. This is where the tax gets pretty big. Each niece or nephew gets a $40,000 exemption from the tax, and then a very high rate of 11% is due to the county of every dollar above that. But it gets worse. If you leave your estate to a non-relative, to a friend, and keep in mind we do not have common law marriage in Nebraska. Across the river in Iowa, if you live with somebody as a spouse for 7 years, you are considered a spouse. Not true in Nebraska. You can have lived with the same person for 40 years, but if you never said I do, you're a non-relative, and you only get the first $25,000 tax-free, and then it's an 13% rate of tax on every dollar over that. I am often the bearer of bad news in that regard. Many people ask me, how can I avoid the Nebraska inheritance tax? Well, there are only 2 types of property that are exempt. Exempt property number 1 is real estate in another state. Did you inherit a farm in Kansas? I met with some folks today who live literally on the state line of Kansas and Nebraska, and they own farm ground in both states. Your farm ground in Kansas is not taxed by the Nebraska inheritance tax. And life insurance to a named beneficiary, which includes a revocable trust or an individual, is exempt. Why? Probably because Larry was the life insurance industry's lobbyist and got it exempt. I don't know. But everything else, retirement accounts, that 401k I'm going to talk about next, and other assets, your house, your farm in Nebraska, are taxed by the Nebraska inheritance tax. The only way to avoid the Nebraska inheritance tax is to move. Sadly, I've had clients do that. I have clients who this time of year aren't here. They're somewhere where it doesn't snow. And they ask me, should I become a Floridian? And I say, well, they don't have a state income tax down there. You know, it's interesting. So if you become a non-Nebraskan, your real estate in Nebraska is still subject to our inheritance tax, but your bank accounts and investments are not. Okay, let's talk about, and before I go on, that's a topic that impacts everybody in Nebraska. Before I talk about the 401k and income taxes, are there any questions about the Nebraska inheritance tax? That's a pretty unique tax. Yes, sir.
Joint property ownership, trust, and individual. Joint property ownership by trust and an individual with separation upon both deaths?
So if you own real estate jointly without a trust, and then I'll answer with the trust. Let's say that I owned a piece of farm real estate jointly with my sister, and I died first. She is going to owe inheritance tax on the one half that I owned when she receives it. She would get the first $100,000 of my half tax-free, and then pay 1% of the value above $100,000. Contrast that if I owned that real estate with my wife as joint tenants. When I die, there's no inheritance tax because she's my spouse. If it's within a revocable trust, the same rules apply. There's a myth out there that a trust avoids inheritance tax. That's not true, although I know there are pockets of the state where on a practical level it's true. I'll just leave it at that. But the state law says that a revocable trust is, as far as our inheritance tax is concerned, it's a look-through. So our county attorney and our county judge and our county treasurer, who are responsible for collecting the tax, will look through it. So it's the same thing. If my sister and I are the beneficiaries of a trust, or we own it in an LLC, you name it, it doesn't matter. It matters how I'm related to the person who receives the property by reason of my death. Did that answer your question?
Not really, but
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I like to answer questions. Please ask a follow-up.
you know, spousal property, part of it, half of it is owned by a trust, half of it's owned by an individual.
I misunderstood your question, sorry. Same answer. Doesn't make a difference.
Upon the death of the trustee, it still would be owned by the trust until such time as the property changes hands.
So the trigger for the Nebraska inheritance tax is not the death of a trustee, who's the person who's in charge of the trust. It's the death of the trustor, who's the person who created the trust, or some people call it a grantor or a settlor. So the person who created the trust, whether that was 30 years ago or yesterday, it's at their death that the inheritance tax is due within 12 months. I'm settling an estate right now that was established by two probates in 1969 and 1970. These were estates that owned 12 different farms across eastern Nebraska, and these folks, when they died in 1969 and 1970, set it up through their will in trust for the benefit of their children for their lifetime. And the last one of their children just died a couple months ago. So now finally, that real estate is being distributed to their grandkids, and some of their grandkids have died, so it's going to some great-grandkids. Now, I was not these folks' attorney because I was born 3 years later in 1972, but I am settling that estate. And the inheritance tax for that estate was due back in 1970 and 1971 when those people died, and so there's no inheritance tax due at this time. Did that answer your question? All right, good. I like that. All right. Final topic before I just list a few more things. I want to talk about that 401k. Real estate's an important, but for most people we meet with, other than a house, their biggest asset is that retirement account that they accumulated at their work. Now, if it's a traditional IRA, this has been something that you and your employer have contributed to pre-tax, which means you haven't paid taxes on it. Now, this does not apply to anybody in this room, but when you get to the age of 74, you'll have to take what's called required minimum distributions, which every year, you'll find out, means that you have to take money out, and you should use that to pay your tithes and offerings here, because you'll get a tax deduction. Is the pastor here? Come on. All right. All right. So, but these accounts being tax deferred, there's only two people who do not pay taxes on them. It's the same as I talked about before, your spouse or qualified charity. And so if you die and leave your retirement account to your spouse can do what's called a tax-free rollover. she or he can create it and it becomes their own IRA, subject to the RMDs, but not subject to a transfer tax of any or penalty of any type. Or you could leave it to a qualified charity, no tax. However, when that traditional IRA goes to anyone other than a spouse or a charity, that's where we have a significant ordinary income tax event. Most people don't know this, and most people don't know the new rules. It was in the past true that a child or a niece or nephew, when they inherited an IRA, could do what was called a stretch IRA. They could stretch it over their lifetime. Well, guess what? Congress took that away from us in the Secure Act, which was passed in 2020 during the pandemic, so nobody knew about it except nerds like me. And the new rules now are unfortunate, in my opinion. When anyone other than a spouse or a charity receives a traditional IRA, they must pay ordinary income tax on it. The only good thing is they can do it over 10 years, but that's it. So I'm often the bearer of bad news, meeting with successful doctor daughter, my friend from East High, who's a doctor in California, and her dad was a professor at the University of Nebraska, and she says, can you believe Mom had a $4 million IRA from all that time that Dad was a professor at the university, and it rolled over. There were no taxes to her when he died, and I know what's coming. I've got to give her the bad news, because you see, she makes a lot of money, and she pays ordinary income tax at 37%, the highest marginal rate. So guess how much of that $4 million she's going to lose? 37%. Nothing I can do about that. The only thing she can do about that is pay that over 10 years. That's why charitable giving has shifted its focus over the last 5 years to qualified accounts, because the only way to avoid a significant income tax event, and you won't be worried about it at the time, but after you die, the only way for your loved one, that was a joke, to avoid a significant, thank you, income tax event is to leave it to a qualified charity. All right, real quickly, I know we're running a little late. The other things that I talk about with the family when I meet with them after someone has died, and I'm piggybacking on Lori's excellent comments, is insurance. That's a biggie. Yes. We've talked about it. I've had house fires after someone dies. That's a disaster. You got to make sure that the insurance is in place. Be careful. Transfer on death deeds sound too good to be true. One of the reasons is, and this has been litigated, Lori alluded to this, if you're relying on a TOD deed, if that says when you die automatically your house goes to your child, double check with your homeowner's insurance that it will cover that child. There was a case out of Minnesota 4 years ago that's well known and applies here. It was a case in Minnesota where a TOD, transfer on death deed, was used. The individual died. Automatically the house transferred, not to a child, actually to a girlfriend. And the house, it's an interesting story. I don't have time to tell the facts. It's really juicy. But the house burned down a few weeks later, and State Farm took the position that the person who had received the property through the TOD deed did not have an insurable interest, and they declined paying for anything for the house. That was litigated in the federal district court in Minnesota. State Farm won. And the reason it's relevant to everyone in this room is that was appealed to the 8th Circuit in St. Louis, which Nebraska is part of, and State Farm won. And it was not litigated past there. So in Nebraska, be careful with TOD deeds. You might not have insurance after you die. Creditors are a big issue. We see lots of medical bills that Medicare and supplemental insurance do not pay for. And so we're helping people work through that. You mentioned electronic legacy. Please do that with social media and the like. This is something I don't understand, but I've seen play out poorly after death. Cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Warren Buffett says don't invest in something if you don't understand it. I don't understand it, so I personally wouldn't invest in it. But I do know from professional experience, if you don't have the key, you don't have anything. We had an estate last year. A wealthy gentleman passed away. Supposedly had $120,000 in Bitcoin, but guess what? Family can't find the key, so poof, it's gone. It doesn't exist. Lori mentioned the personal property list. Yes, we have it in Nebraska. Most attorneys attach what I call a laundry list to the will or the trust, where you say, this is who gets mom's wedding ring. This is who gets dad's favorite shotgun. To use the top two examples, we see jewelry and firearms. Things you do not want sold, but rather given to a specific person. Be careful. There are 3 types of property in Nebraska that cannot legally transfer on a laundry list. Number 1, real property. You cannot say on the laundry list, farm A goes to my daughter, farm B goes to my son. If the son doesn't like the farm that he's getting, and you put it on the laundry list and not in your will or trust, he can object, force the sale, get half the money. Number 2, anything else that it takes a title to own, your car, your truck, your trailer, your boat, these things have titles. That sailboat, it may have had a title. That's why I was laughing. And be careful. In Nebraska, since 2008, we've had the ability to do transfer on death on the title itself. You can take the title to your vehicle to the DMV, where you get your license or license plate and say, hello. Pastor Tom loves to get vehicles down at the People's City Mission, transfer on death to the People's City Mission, or transfer on death to my favorite grandchild. But it doesn't work to put it on the laundry list. Why? It has a title. This city kid thinks it's hilarious that a farmer can put his $1 million combine on a laundry list because it doesn't have a title. Big loophole for farmers and ranchers, but cannot put a pickup truck. And the final thing that catches the most people unaware, 2 quick examples, and then I'll be quiet. From my practice just last year, money, or any form that money takes, cannot go on a laundry list. 2 examples from my practice. Of course, I don't use names, but I had a lovely widow client here in Lincoln pass away, and on her laundry list, the personal property list, she wrote $10,000 to her church. Well, her 2 children didn't like her church. Why? Politics. And so they said to me, do we have to honor that request? And I said, there's 2 answers to that. There's the legal answer and there's the moral answer. The legal answer is no. That's a financial gift. It should have been in a beneficiary designation or in the will, and so you don't have to. The moral answer is, even though it does not line up with my Reformed theology, if you don't do what your mom wanted, I think she'll come back and haunt you. By the way, they didn't take my advice. They didn't give the money to the church, which I thought stunk. And then the final example, had a client who knew better, but I think to give him some grace, he wasn't doing well at the end of life, had a safe deposit box, and on the laundry list said all the contents of my safe deposit box go to one child instead of the other, but in the trust it was 50-50. We went to open up the safe deposit box. You guessed it, hundreds of thousands of dollars of gold bars. Didn't work because that was U.S. currency. You can't put it on the laundry list. So that was divided. The daughter's still mad at me that thought she should get it all. There's nothing I can do about it. So do not put money. Do not put real estate. Do not put titled vehicles on that laundry list. And that's enough. So I'll be quiet. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we have the wireless microphone. I'll be coming around. Please speak into the microphone and then say if your question's for Andrew or for Lori or you don't care.
So I'm over 59 and a half now. Can I take out money out of a 401k and gift it to my church?
Yes.
Okay,
Up to 100,000.
without a tax and
Up to
all?
100,000.
Okay.
Please.
You know, so a QCD is what you're talking about. I actually did that for my church pledge this fall. It was super easy. Check went right from Vanguard came to me, but made out to the church, and I just sent it in. It was super easy, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Follow-up to that, though, if you do not itemize, is it still, or, I mean, if you just take that general and you don't itemize?
Great question for your account.
Okay.
That's why God created CPAs. So, I'm sorry.
Okay.
They're asking us. This gentleman asked me an excellent question that I deflected because Lori and I are not accountants, and some lawyers do income tax work. I do not, and so you did. So you may know the answer to that, but I do not.
Yeah, it depends on your situation, but a lot of people can't itemize anymore anyway. So, you know, if you can itemize, that's an issue. If you can't itemize anyway, then I'm not sure, honestly, because I can't itemize anymore since I don't have a house and so forth, so.
We have any online questions, Nancy?
No, just put the mic up to their mouths because we can't hear them.
Okay.
I'm the surviving spouse. Where do I start to get that transfer on death deed for my house and car?
I believe that those are available online somewhere. Lawyers obviously prepare transfer on death deeds. It's a form that the Nebraska legislature created that I'm positive that you can find. If you go to the Register of Deeds office, they might even give you some guidance on that. We have a very helpful Register of Deeds office down at the County City building here in Lincoln on the second floor. It's the same part where the mayor and city council are. It's up on the second floor. They're very helpful.
Nancy has an online question? Does she have a regular question? Okay. I'm taking her the microphone.
So if I put my house in a revocable trust and then 2 years from now I decide to move, how hard is it for me to get it out of that trust so I can sell it and move?
The answer is not hard at all. That's one of the beautiful things about a revocable trust is you own it. If drafted correctly, you're the trustee. And so it's as easy as signing the purchase agreement as trustee of your trust. And then the money will come to you because you're the owner of the revocable trust. A revocable trust does not have an EIN or a tax identification number. The government, the IRS and the Nebraska Department of Revenue don't care about it until it's irrevocable, which means you died. And so there's no reporting requirements. But be careful. Most people know that part, but most people forget that when you buy your new house or when you buy into an assisted living facility, you have to remember, I need to buy my new house in the name of my trust or the assisted living facility in the name of the trust. Otherwise, if it's worth more than $100,000, there's a probate. And that's what we see about 10% of people miss. They don't miss being able to sell the house. They forget that when they buy a second house or another house, they forget to put it into the trust that they did 20 years ago. And then they die, and then their kids say, we got to have a probate. And then they're mad at me. And I say, don't get mad at me.
One of the things that I think we're seeing in this church and probably other churches too is increasing popularity of the qualified charitable distributions. This is not something you get a credit for a gift, but this is something that is a little bit different. Could you explain that and any pitfalls there that we should be careful of? Qualified charitable distributions, commonly called QCDs.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Duh. Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. And qualified charitable distributions, QCDs, out of your tax-deferred accounts can be made now up to $100,000 a year. And the benefit to you is that you're not being taxed on that as income, and it's something Congress has done to encourage people to do charitable giving during their lifetime. And so Lori had mentioned that just from a pragmatic standpoint, it's very easy to do. I think people have found it to be the way after 59 and a half, which is when you can start doing it, to make your tithes and offerings to church. So I would strongly encourage all of you to consider that. I think the public policy reason behind this, Larry, is because despite what people think, I can tell you from someone who sees this, those 401ks and IRAs, when someone dies, are almost always exactly what they were or a little bit less than when the person retired. I know what you think, that you're going to retire and then when you die, the retirement account will be down to zero. That's not reality given the performance of the stock market over the last 20 years. Now that could obviously change, but I can tell you as somebody who watches this every day, spouses and children are just amazed at how large their parent or spouse's IRA is, and that's because that those RMDs are about 5% a year. Well, on average, a lot of times, if invested well, you're going to make more than that. And so they aren't shrinking like people thought they would. So I think this is a way to encourage people to use more of it, because for a lot of people, that's by far their largest asset when they pass away. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think from the church's standpoint, they love to see it come in too, because it's something generally that's very predictable. And it's not something that people are concerned about, but they don't have to be concerned about a credit limitation. I mean, with the contribution, you have to give $26,000 or $27,000 before you get any kind of a deduction. But with QCDs, you don't have to give that much. Right,
and that was this gentleman's question earlier that I deflected to a CPA, is because of most of us do not itemize it, there may be not deductions, but the benefit's still there, because when you give the money to the qualified charity, you're not paying income taxes on that, whereas if you had taken the money, you would pay ordinary income taxes. Let me just mention one other thing. I think embedded in your question, Larry, that predictability, and for anyone who served on your stewardship committee, you know that something that is not predictable and a challenge is when someone who is a good giver dies. And that's a real challenge for those of us in the mainline Protestant world now. And so I've had several clients, and I think this is really cool, do planned gifts, whether it's through the Nebraska United Methodist Foundation or the Lincoln Community Foundation, to endow their annual gift, their annual gift to church, index for inflation for a period of years after they die. I think that's pretty cool. So that's something to think about. If you really love this place and you know that you're a pretty big percentage of the budget, and after you die, that goes away. You might think, and I've had several clients do this, and one come to fruition, that means they died, it's working like a charm, and that church is sure thankful that for a period of years, this is 25 years, they're going to get that same gift to the budget.
So, just one thing, Andrew, I was thinking that the 70 and a half to use a QCD out of the retirement account.
Okay, I might be wrong then. So I'm showing that not only am I not an accountant, I'm not a financial advisor. So double check with your financial advisor on the 59 and a half. Lori thinks it might be 70 and a half before you can do the...
Carrie really knows.
Carrie really knows, so we're going to defer to Carrie. So I apologize. Again, I'll stick to the legal stuff from now on. So sorry about that.
Two questions.
I had a quick question, just wanted to ask, death certificate, where do you get them? How many do you need to send away to banks and insurance companies and whatever?
The mortuary will order the death certificate for you. Typically, they get about 7. The average estate doesn't need that many. Some estates need more. They're very easy to order through the Department of Health and Human Services if you need another one. And conveniently in Lincoln, they're right here, so you can even go see them down in the state office building downtown. Yep.
Just one comment and a couple of questions. The first comment is that the QCD, if you're going to give to a charitable organization, probably should be given directly from your account to the organization. Otherwise, it gets a little bit confusing if you end up in your bank account and then you turn around and have to do something different with it. So it's just a matter of accounting for it. And I don't know whether or not it's because you get the RMD, you can get the qualification or not. So would depend on that. You mentioned that the accounts for your bank accounts, et cetera, the numbers, the account number should be listed. If you have a Fidelity or a bank with several CDs and those types of things, do you need to have each individual or just the bank that you're working with that would have those accounts listed? Would you list the bank of XYZ, or you would try to list the bank of XYZ, account number 1, 2, 5, 7, 3, on down the list?
Well, maybe it kind of depends on how much things change. So if you got CDs and, they're rolling every year and they've got new numbers and so forth, maybe that's a little bit burdensome. But maybe there's a statement that you get that, lists them all as well, so that you could include that in your notebook. For regular accounts, whether you're talking bank accounts or Fidelity or whoever, I put the account numbers in. And again, just thinking, well, maybe that'll be helpful. So maybe it depends a little bit how burdensome that is, how many things you're talking about. I can see if you had laddered CDs and they're rolling constantly, maybe that'd be kind of a pain. I don't know if you got a thought on that, Andrew? So, yeah, personally, I'd do it. But.
Andrew, what about in Roth? You're talking about traditional RIAs for your classmate that mom had at Ford Mill. What if it had been a Roth instead of traditional?
Roths are contributed to with post-tax dollars, and so the magic with those is when the money comes out, there's no income taxes. So they're great.
Not that tall, gotta adjust the microphone. Oh, sorry. Okay. Wish I was that tall, but. Well, this has been wonderful. We thank everybody for coming. Thank everybody who's been online. Everybody's had great questions. And we bid you a fond evening. Thank you so much. Next presentation is the first Tuesday of February. Next presentation, Janine Bryant, and how to get rid of stuff and let it go.
It's not easy. I heard somebody, I was at a thing the other day, and somebody told me they were going to leave all their stuff with their kids. Thank you. Yeah, it's good. Good. Good job. Well, thank you. Thank you. So, Andrew and I have fun. So.